This is Start Disrupting, a show about the innovators, scientists, and designers disrupting industries and creating 10x impact. I'm your host, Brett Malone, President and CEO of the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Today on the show is Gary Noesner. He's a retired FBI hostage negotiator, spent 23 years with the FBI, involved in a variety of crisis negotiation involving takeovers, hijackings, and over 120 overseas kidnapping cases involving American citizens. On the show today, our conversation focuses on the crisis within the crisis, how entrepreneurs who are building companies can think about skills that Gary has learned around options, around stalling for time, as his book points out, using the clock and time as your advantage, and the overall concept of being likable. Sit back, you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Gary. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Gary, you're a native basically to Virginia. You've been here for many years in your career, and now you're living the good life up at Smith Mountain Lake. How did you get here and into our region?
Yeah, in the late 70s, the FBI transferred me from South Carolina, where I was assigned, as sort of routine rotation, and to the Washington field office of the FBI. And we lived in Northern Virginia and raised our family there. And, after I retired from the FBI, we eventually moved down here to the larger Roanoke area at Smith Mountain Lake. And it's a beautiful area. I like the locale in a lot of different ways, good people, and we've met some good friends here, and it's a good lifestyle.
We're glad to have you in our region and glad to consider you a resource. As you know, and as this show really focuses on entrepreneurship, technology, and what people can be doing to disrupt economies, disrupt technologies. And so some of our listeners may be asking, what is Gary doing on my show? But I have found your book, first of all, fascinating. The book is called Stalling for Time: My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator. I found it fascinating from an interpersonal dynamic. And one of the comments, I think somewhere along the book, you talk about people dealing with people who have strong beliefs, inflexible interpretation of events. And, what I want to do is dig in a little bit to some of that interpersonal understanding, your ability to listen to a situation and help understand how to navigate through a solution. And we find that a lot of our entrepreneurs, a lot of our startup, a lot of our young investigators find that they're very smart and they're very, very capable on the technology side and the research side. But when it comes to dealing with people and making their way through broadly what could be considered negotiations, those are difficult skills for them. So I wanted to start there.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we get it backward in the business world. We really focus in on the strategic steps of making an offer and closing a deal and wrapping up a relationship or a contract. My view is we have to work on the relationship first. I believe everything is based on a working relationship, a positive relationship. The business guru Stephen Covey says, first seek to understand and then to be understood. And I think that's a very succinct way of making a very important point is, good entrepreneurs, I think, will probably be good listeners. They're people who are gathering information, learning everything they can in a respectful and genuine manner. That eventually accrues to allowing you to have some influence over the engagement you're having with the other person, because you have demonstrated a respect for them, an interest in what they're doing, what they're saying. You've asked open-ended questions that gather more information. You've acknowledged their feelings about things that are important to them and how they're excited about this new development they have in their company. All of these things are well-known methods to, although not well-practiced methods, to really help us create a positive relationship. People want to be listened to, they want to be understood, they want to be appreciated. And it is listening the cheapest concession that we can make. It costs you absolutely nothing. But I think most of your listeners here can reflect back to a time where they were in a social engagement or perhaps a work meeting, and they met someone for the first time, and something about that person they just found very likable and agreeable, and they said, hey, I hope I get to work with them again or see them again, or that would be a good person to partner with, whatever it might be.
Right.
That's a powerful component in interpersonal dynamics, and one that we can build upon if you do it in a sincere and genuine way. Not a, we always have a joke in this country about the poor misunderstood used car salesman, and
All right.
you walk into the showroom and he pretends like you've been best buddies since childhood, and hey, Brett, good to see you. I know what you need. And it's a big turnoff for a lot of people because you say, like, no, you don't know me. We don't have a relationship. You haven't earned the right yet to be that familiar with me. So instead of that approach, a better salesman's sort of like a Columbo kind of guy. Hey, Brett, welcome to the shop. Take a look around. I'll be sitting over there. If you need anything, have any questions, feel free to ask. But otherwise, I'll let you move around the showroom as you want. I mean, that's the guy I'm going to go to, and I think that's the kind of person a lot of people work with. Well, I think you can extrapolate that out to larger, entrepreneurial or business activities. Be patient. Work first on the relationship, and then we can focus in more specifically on what proposal we might make that we feel will help enhance the business that we're trying to develop with this person.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And from my experience working a lot in business development and in various technologies, biotech, aerospace, software, a lot of it's very similar where the early stages is thinking about discovery. The broad concept of discovery and building a relationship is, you're discovering what's important for that person and what's important for you. A lot of times you may not even understand what you're willing to bring to the table until you know what the chemistry looks like. And a lot of people find that chemistry comes out naturally if they start digging a little bit differently early on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that I will share with you in terms of my thinking is really based on many years of working in very desperate situations with very lethal consequences on the line. And yet we succeeded as FBI negotiators, law enforcement negotiators in the 90 percentile. And you say, well, in these worst of circumstances, if the skill sets really achieve the goals we want in those, then certainly they have applicability in less life and death encounters.
Yeah.
And, when we used to get perpetrators, it's a good New York City Police Department word, perpetrators. When we get the perpetrators to comply, cooperate, surrender, we always got in the habit of asking them, what was it that we said that made you, cooperate and come out and surrender peacefully? And the answer was always the same. I don't remember what you said, but I like the way you said it. And I think that's a really important and powerful lesson for people. I mean, really work on becoming likable, and you're likable because you're showing an interest in someone else. You're asking them follow-up questions. You are slowly and steadily demonstrating your worth and your genuineness. And if people like that, they want to work with you. Everybody wants to work with people they like and respect and respect them.
Well, in with the entrepreneur who's building a company and ultimately raising money. So if you're going after venture capital, obviously venture capitalists, they won't be shy to say, look, we bet on the jockey, right? And so, you don't bet on the horse, you bet on the jockey, and you bet on the management team. And companies get funded because of that likability, that chemistry. You see a lot of times where people make investments and they're not really sure they agree or they understand the technology, or they're not convinced the market is there, but they know that they're investing in a team that can figure it out and pivot. And a lot of that comes from the trust that comes from that chemistry.
No, I think you're right. And I've seen a similar comparable in hiring. One of the things I always learned both in the private sector and before is if you get a really good candidate to show an interest in coming to work for your company, and you don't necessarily have a position in mind for them, scoop them up anyway. Again, you're hiring the jockey, not the horse. I mean, this person is the kind of person I want on my team. I can teach him the very unique aspects of our business and the particulars that he wouldn't have an opportunity to know otherwise. But he comes in with the framework of the right kind of eager, enthusiastic, responsible person I want. Don't let them walk out of your office. Hire them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, your book is just chock full of more stories than I can frankly recount and remember here. Your background is just so impressive. And the stories of the engagements, the stories of the tense times that you've been able to just think through. What stands out in your mind is something that's just sort of a very notable success, just to help orient the listener and who may not have either read your book or
Sure.
really understand your body of work. It's quite impressive. And I think it'd be helpful for some of our listeners to understand a little bit of the background that you're bringing and from a perspective of what you believe is one of your most notable successes.
Sure. Well, let me frame it this way. My book is about it's several things. It's about the sort of evolution of law enforcement hostage / crisis negotiations. It's my personal journey in terms of autobiographical. But I think more important, within the incident stories that I relay, I am sharing learning points. And sometimes those were mistakes we made, and sometimes those were creative solutions that we came up with. I think it's important that that we maintain a clear-headed approach. We work in a team. We assess what we're trying to accomplish. We all get our oars in the water and rowing at the same time. And we use the creative talent of our team to be flexible. Flexibility is a key issue. And really working at self-control, avoiding the pitfall of getting angry at the person you're dealing with, being frustrated. Are you going to give me a serious offer or what? That's not going to help your cause. So you have to be very patient and know that some individuals and teams you're dealing with move very slowly. Others are very quick, shoot from the hip. And you have to adapt to all that.
I think that's great. And obviously your involvement in such a diverse, one of the other things that's very notable in your book, obviously, is the diversity of the backgrounds of the people that you had to deal with. And,
Yeah.
International, you did a lot of work internationally, a lot of work in the Middle East. So now you're factoring in and layering in the cultures that come
Yeah.
with those personalities. And that in and of itself is a whole book.
Well, and now I realize what I forgot to answer. You asked me what is maybe a well-known success story. In 1996, the FBI confronted an anti-government right-wing sort of separatist group in Montana called the Freemen. And having learned from the tragedy of Waco 3 years before, in that instance, the FBI negotiation team that I led was not as effective as we would have otherwise been because of, others in the FBI that wanted to take a much more aggressive approach. We still got 35 people out, including 21 children. But because it ended tragically, it was, I think, certainly a failure. 3 years later, with this difficult and challenging situation, the director of the FBI said, "Hey, negotiators, you're in charge. Show us the way. How do we do this?" And we did it. And it took 85 days, but no shots fired, nobody killed, no lawsuits, no congressional hearings, no reputational damage. And, most people haven't heard about the Montana Freeman siege because of those things. No fiery ending, no lawsuits, and so forth. But I think in many ways, it was a revalidation of what we had done before Waco and what we've done since. Waco was more a departure, in my view. And so that, for many reasons for me, was amongst maybe the most significant thing I worked on.
That's a really good example also of how internal forces, so even within your company, you have competing sort of strategies. And as a negotiator, you were dealing with internal forces to say, hey, let's use more force, more aggression. And the fact that, your techniques were brought to the forefront. A lot of times, as your company gets larger, and I'm trying to put this in the context of, again, a business, from my perspective, as your company grows and you start to get more influences from different directions, whether it's legal, accounting, whether it's stakeholders, board of directors, shareholders, venture capitalists, investors who want to just push something, as a founder, a leader, an entrepreneur, you've got to figure out how to balance and bring the right skills to the table to solve a problem. And, that step to say, let's bring the negotiators in, let's give you the lead, let's give you the tiller. As a business leader, that's a decision that has to be made on a very frequent basis as well. And so your perspective on sort of balancing those competing forces that you had to deal with in such a tense situation.
Yeah, it's actually what we called in my former life the crisis within the crisis. Dealing with an adversary, even an adversarial group, even a very dangerous one, to be honest with you, is a fairly predictable activity. We kind of know that, they're going to be distrustful, they're going to be angry. We're going to have to slowly, methodically build up a relationship where they come to a point of realizing they don't have as much power and control as they thought, and that cooperation is ultimately in their best interest. We know that process in most instances, although some do end tragically despite our efforts. But we know in most instances that leads us to the payoff we want. And that is not having police officers go in and get harmed, and not having hostages killed and so forth. In the business world, you're right. You have an idea, you've developed this relationship with a client, and you feel you're ready to close a deal. And now the finance people come in, and now the risk management people come in, and now the manufacturing side says, we can't fill that many orders. We need this, we need that. Right. Then HR comes in, and there's a lot of players. Mm-hmm. And it really becomes a separate and, in many instances, harder negotiation. I used to joke, near the end of my career, when I would rarely be on the phone anymore, I'm leading the team. And I would say, what you guys are doing is easy. You're just dealing with a guy with a gun that's trying to kill somebody. I got to deal with our bosses, and the attorney general and the White House. And, you have no idea how difficult that is. But you have to get those people in line. You have to get them supporting it.
You're touching on what I'm sure is very relevant for those who have started the scale-up process. The entrepreneurs know that's coming, perhaps, but this crisis within the crisis is really an important topic to manage. And it's not, it's a daily balance of tension and forces. And, there's never a case where any one team leads. And this is where balance in teams are important, but it's also vision and, decision-making as a leader is really important to know when to balance and optimize all your skills and attributes.
And the other thing is, most organizations, there's a turnover of leadership. So you have this great relationship with your immediate report. He retires, is transferred to Omaha. Next thing you know, you're dealing with this person that doesn't know you and is a complete horse's ass. Mm-hmm. I went through that in the FBI. I've been doing this a long time. And, I was a fairly known commodity, and I got a new boss, and he didn't know me. Mm-hmm. And early in our relationship, he started questioning everything I did and almost interrogating me. And I finally said, can we have a meeting? I really is something important I need to talk to you about. And he closed the door, and we sat down. I said, listen, here's the deal. I'm sensing that you don't trust me or what I'm doing. Well, let me explain to you how I look at things. If I come in and ask you to do something, it's because I think it's important. If it's something that would be okay to do, but it's not vital, I'll tell you that. Okay. I said, I need your trust. I can't do my job if you don't trust me to be open and honest with you. And it changed our whole relationship. He became a fantastic supportive boss. Yeah. But I had to get through that initial barrier of, I got to come in here and mark my territory and let them know who's in charge and tell people I'm watching them. And I said, okay, I suspect with time I would have earned his trust anyway, but I felt I needed to bring it out in the open. And I think in some companies, that's an important thing to do,
Well, I think, it's wise counsel for just about any personal relationship. And obviously, as you said, as leadership changes, and now in some cases, as the leadership changes, you have these different competing forces in a company that restructure, they sort of jockey for power. It's all has to be managed. So I want to shift topics actually, and just dive into it, at least an idea of mine where we have this concept of options and always having options and running out of options. And, it seems to me like that's a little bit of your currency in your world that you came from. And I'm curious because a lot of times when I put this in the concept of a product, a technology, a market, we immediately start to put boundaries, and we start to really limit the perception of what's possible with either the product, the market, the sales team, it's all of these factors. And yet when you step back, you realize, oh, well, we can put this product in a different market, and no one has considered that as an option. So maybe I'm not using the right word. Option might not be the right word, but I have this notion that there's more optionality. There's more sort of routes that can be taken. And, in your world, you probably had to have sort of dug for ways to find new routes when people were perceiving things as coming to a point where you were going to be out of options. Am I resonating with any of this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the keys to success is flexibility and ingenuity and creativity. Robert Kennedy, I probably messed the quote up, said it so great. He said, some people ask why, and I ask why not. In my own situation, there were times where I was involved in situations where decision makers above me would say, well, why are we going to do that? What do we get out of it? And I would say, you're asking the wrong question. The question is, what do we lose?
Right.
What do we lose?
Yeah.
There were times in my career, I talked about that Montana Freeman situation where we thought we were getting close to a surrender. And the leader said, I want to fly and meet with one of the guys you arrested and to see what he says to do. Now, never in the history of law enforcement have you flown a perpetrator from a crisis site, let him have a meeting in a prison, and then fly him to put him back in the site. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And everybody pushed back on that. We can't do that. And I said, well, why not? Why not? He's in prison where he's in already. He's not going anywhere. But I think he'll talk to this person and I think he'll come out. Well, what if this person tells him not to surrender? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure from my read of having met with him face to face that he's looking for approval. And if the guy doesn't give it to him, I think he's going to lead his people out anyway. So I think every once in a while you have to take a chance and realize that you can't guarantee a result, but be flexible, be open. It's with us, it's like the guy doesn't want to surrender because he don't want to be embarrassed in front of his neighbors. So you say, hey, you want to come out the back of the house? We can do that.
Right.
We can put the handcuffs behind you. We don't have to parade you like a trophy. I mean, sometimes little things like that are terribly important to somebody.
Right.
We assume they shouldn't be, but they may well be. And through your conversation, you try to explore and fathom what those real deep concerns are. I dealt with a situation once where a police officer had been fired and he kept talking about getting his pension restored and everything. But at the end of the day, he felt really belittled in the community. Mm-hmm. He was embarrassed and he wanted his reputation back. He said, I want to be able to walk down the street and hold my head up high. That's what was driving his threatening behavior, not the fact that his pension had been reduced or lost or whatever. So sometimes you really have to dig deep and keep your ears and eyes open to find out what those things are that are important.
Well, this takes us all the way back to the beginning, which is just good listening skills and actually trying to interpret the origin when you're listening and you're hearing people say certain things, you've got to connect that to, all right, well, what's driving them? As you mentioned, sort of someone's validation or someone just needed approval.
Yeah.
And, this soup of pride and ego and, respect for someone, handling someone respectfully can get you so far down the road. And, it doesn't have to be a win-lose. It doesn't have to be, that you're beating the opponent. And just as you said, you don't have to trot them out like a trophy. It has to be more about helping who you're working with maintain that respect and actually gain more out of the deal at the end of the day.
Yeah, you may be acquiring companies. You may be venture capitalists and you're acquiring companies. And the guy's in trouble. He's got to get rid of his company. But he's resisting and slowing down and fine. And then maybe you come to them and say, would you feel more comfortable if we kept your name on the company? Right. Smith Enterprises.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe in this guy's mind, he spent his whole life building this company. It's failed now, but he's got pride, I mean, maybe that's something you can't do, but I'm saying if you have some flexibility, sometimes it's little things like that really sell the deal. In real estate now, what's the big trend? A personal letter. And, we would say in the past, what the hell is that gonna do? Somebody's gonna sell you their house because you've written them a nice letter and you say, well, we saw that you raised your family here. We want to raise our family here and make this our long-term home. That sort of thing really has appeal to a lot of people. And maybe your bid is just slightly less than somebody else's, but may say, we like these people. That's who we're selling to.
That is interesting. So I want to tackle one more topic and then wrap it up, and we'll give you a chance to give some advice to some of our younger investigators. I want to talk about the role of time and the idea of sort of deadlines. And, you obviously, we talked about flexibility and optionality. So the other dimension in my mind anyway is the concept of time and the benefit of, not using time pressure. And so many of us feel like they're just working under this deadline. We've got to get this done by this date. And, my experience anyway is, if you get past that deadline, there's still interest. There's still, things that can be done. Talk to me just a little bit about your perspective of time, deadlines, and managing the clock, and how have you used that, let's say, to your advantage, and how should maybe entrepreneurs or, people in our world, how should they think about the clock maybe differently?
I think they have to be careful. A lot of people look at it as a stimulus to close the deal. If we don't get this done by this weekend, the deal's off. And there may be real and legitimate reasons why that's the case, but quite often it's an artificial deadline intended to stimulate a decision-making process. And I suggest that, we've got to be careful about that. It's better to make a good deal than a fast, bad deal. And, and think carefully. My book's called Stalling for Time because, in the medical profession, they say first do no harm. And in the hostage negotiation profession, it's if you do nothing else, stall for time. Because what that does is it lowers emotion. It lowers the levels of frustration and anger and allows rational thinking and behavior to increase. And that then leads to better solutions. And I think the same can be true with a company. There is a time to walk away from things. Mm-hmm. And there's a time to say, that we've got to wrap this up by a certain date for, that's when our funding ends or something like that. Mm-hmm. But in more cases than not, it seems to me those dates become artificial. And the other side is aware of that, Yeah. Oh, they say they got a deadline. Well, they really don't, and you've got to be careful. Well, there's 3 other buyers that want this property, so you better get it soon. And they know, and that you don't have 3 other buyers. And, they're trying to use some pretty basic sales techniques on you. So I skew more towards an honest expression of, we've done a lot of research. We really like your company. We really like to partner on this. And we'd like to see what we need to do to resolve any issues or questions that you have and be available to address any concerns that you have as we engage in this merger, And even if you don't win that particular piece of business, they may go in a different direction and it may go south on them. Maybe they come knocking back on your door later on. Brett, remember that conversation we had a year ago? Well, that deal we went didn't kind of work out so well. So you think we could open that discussion again? And they're going to do that because you were genuine, sincere, and respectful in the way you treated them.
Yeah, I think I have seen that more often than not. And it's still always surprising when you get on the other side of that and realize that. And, you would think that we would have figured that out by now, but it still seems to be the go-to ploy. And, I'm on your side to say, give it some more time, or, let's not manufacture a bunch of, artificial deadlines, because the perception of pressure really doesn't help you. And, one of my greatest mentors that I worked with out in Denver, he was, very good at saying, well, let's just see what happens. And, it was fun because I was younger and I was watching him, and it felt to me like this game of chicken or brinksmanship. But, the concept of, well, let's just wait and see. What I learned was more information would come out. You would get a little smarter if you gave it another week, and you'd learn a little something different. And it may or may not have been to your advantage, but you learned enough to inform whether or not you had enough information. And, I was always amazed at his ability to sort of wait and see, and things always seemed to clarify. And we were never in a worse spot because of that.
Yeah. And sometimes these artificial debt, it's like the merchant that always has a going out of business sale, and it lasts for 2 years. And you say, okay, give me a break. This is fine if you want to draw on people for something truly special, but these aren't sale prices. And, this gimmick is running a little thin for me. So, right. I think you have to know when and how to play certain cards, and there is a time and a place. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but I think in everything we've talked about here, Brett, the first thought of the entrepreneur, the businessman, is relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't guarantee you success, but it helps you avoid unnecessary failure,
Mm-hmm.
and always leaves the door open for you for a second go at it later on.
Yeah, I think, that's really the best advice is keep the door open, keep your options open. And, you'll find yourself in better situations because as information emerges, you may realize you can put a few pieces together and from our perspective, maybe move a product into a different market you hadn't thought of, or,
Yeah.
Have different terms on a deal that you wouldn't have originally thought of. But now as more information comes to light, you're willing to, give on that or add some new terms.
Yeah. And I like, let's say I'm the one responsible for this relationship and the deal does not get closed. I see nothing wrong with meeting with the person, the person you're dealing with and say, I know we didn't get this contract but I'm hopeful that at some point in the future, we will be able to do some business. And I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable sharing with me what you think I could have done better, or how did we handle this that gave you pause? Was it the price point? Was it our team's approach? I mean, I'd like to know because I want to improve. And it's my experience that most people are very receptive to offering that. They might not offer it unless you ask. How did I screw that up? Well, the guy you brought in there with you was a know-it-all and a complete horse's ass, and
Right.
it turned us off. Well, need to know that, and say, and you thank them. Thank you. I mean, it hurts me to hear that, but I appreciate your input, and I will take it to heart. And this has helped me a great deal, and I hope we get to work together in the future.
I think that's so important because at the end of the day, and it's kind of funny too, because here at the research park, we've got 36 buildings, 220 companies. We've got 4,000 people on our campus. And yet we've got people here who have been here for 25 years. They're on their fourth startup. They are sort of in the Hall of Fame of entrepreneurship, if you will. And I observe this as the companies come and go, but a lot of the people stay the same. And so within our ecosystem, you really have to think about it the long term. You have to think about the relationship you have with this person. And, as we have this ecosystem in Blacksburg, we really have to manage the individual relationships with people because, to get a short-term gain but damage a long-term relationship is just tragic.
I agree. I know you wanted me to come up with some final thoughts, and I would say self-control is a terribly important issue. You as the person trying to develop business or manage business, you've got to keep your own emotions in check, because if you can't do that, how do you expect to influence others? And then the next most important thing is just become a good listener. And listening is not a passive endeavor where you zip your mouth shut and sit back. It is an endeavor in which you can demonstrate that you're listening by paraphrasing, repeating back, summarizing, mirroring what they say, acknowledging the emotional drivers behind the situation that they're describing. Those are all highly underappreciated, underrated, incredibly important interpersonal skill aspects that we all need to be better at. We tend to take for granted those things around us. And yet we really need to sit down and become really good listeners. And it's tough when you're a manager and you've got 20 things on your calendar today, and one of your employees comes in and says, "Boss, can I have a little bit of your time? I've got a problem." Unless it's an emergency ongoing, you have to carve out that time and put the phones on hold, come out behind your desk, tell your secretary you don't want to be interrupted, and say, "What's going on? What can I do for you?" And it means the world to those people. And you rarely have to solve a problem, but you have to show you care and you're listening.
Absolutely. That's rule number one. I mean, just investing your time, and, currently it's trendy to say, be mindful, be present, but, all of that's rolled up into just paying attention and listening. And
it truly, truly is. And, I think sometimes people tend to make these kinds of things we're talking about more complicated than they need to be. Of all the work I've done, I've boiled down good negotiations to one attribute: likability.
there you
Plain
go.
old, good old all-American likability. And how do you become likable? Well, people might define it different ways, but we know it when we see it.
I think that's fantastic, and there could not be a better way to end this. Gary Noesner, thank you so much. I know you came into this sandbagging on me a little bit because you said you didn't think you had much to offer from the business side of things, but I think you've been a wealth of information for some of our Hall of Fame entrepreneurs all the way down to some of our youngest investigators. I know this advice is going to really go a long way, and it's really important that they think about working on these skills and attributes because, at the end of the day, if you're a master of the technology, but you're not likable, your company might not get as far as it could.
That's true. That's true. Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks again, Gary. Great having you. Gary Noesner, retired FBI hostage negotiator, and we're glad to have him in our ecosystem. We're glad to consider him one of our family. So thank you again, Gary.
You're welcome.
And that's it for this episode. Subscribe to Start Disrupting wherever you get your podcasts. We have a new disruptor on our show every 2 weeks, and you're not going to want to miss it. Check out vtcrc.com for the latest on our research park and over 225 companies that call us home. Until next time, always change the game.